So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, our presenter today, Judy Sinner, Gold Director, and let's learn a little bit about horse care in the wintertime. Judy, take it away.
All righty. Well, I think everybody who has horses kind of cringes when winter hits, especially in the northern states, because it can be very labor intensive. And one thing that I'd like to point out is that horses have a hard time with the transition from fall into winter. There's what's called, even in normal horses that don't have Cushing's disease, there's a seasonal rise in the ACTH, which is the adrenocorticotropic hormone that's produced by the pituitary gland. And it's proven that this hormone rises to nearly double even in non-Cushing's horses. So it's a late summer, autumn thing. In the northern hemisphere, September, October is the highest level of ACTH that's circulating in the bloodstream. So that alone makes horses a little bit more fragile. And I've tongue-in-cheek, euphemistically called September National Colic Month. I want to say clear cancel, but I lost the stallion that was in the last newsletter in early September. And it just seems like September is a tough time. We have hot days, cold nights, barometric pressure changes, really sudden storms that come up. So keep an eye on your horses starting in September. It's not a bad time to consider adding some easy balance to the ration if you're feeding Dynamite or Dynamite Plus. If you're feeding TNT, it's already in there, like Ragu, it's in there. So I'm a big believer in boosting up their nutrition starting late August even. The minute you start to see coat changes, which can happen as early as mid-August, the coat changes happen in response to the shorter daylight hours rather than the actual temperature. But anybody that's paying attention will start to notice just a little bit of fuzz starting up by mid-August in the northern states. So in the southern hemisphere, interestingly, the seasonal ACTH happens like in May. So this is kind of a northern hemisphere thing. If you live in South America, you can disregard. So anyway, given that they are more fragile at this time, it's a really good time to be careful about vaccines, chemical wormers. Any interventions ideally would be done before that September, October window. I know a lot of people like to wait till after the first killing frost and do a dewormer for bots. There is one little trick to the bot thing. I'm not a fan of the ivermectin wormers, but if you use like 1/5 of the dose, that is good enough to get bots, but not enough to harm the horse. Although I've never had an issue with the bots using the herbal tonic, using our Clay Excel herbal tonic protocol. Another thing you can do is suffocate the bot eggs. If you see them on the horse's knees, just take any kind of oil. Use the crappy corn oil from your kitchen that isn't fit for human consumption and just swipe the legs with that, and that will actually suffocate the bot eggs. They have a little blowhole that they breathe through. Now will actually suffocate the eggs. It's a better option, other than cosmetically, it's a better option than scraping them off where they blow around in the wind and end up getting ingested anyway. So anyhow, careful about vaccines, wormers, etc. I like to put a little bit of extra weight on horses in the colder climates before winter. That would be what would happen in nature. They'd be at their heaviest weight going into the cold season, so that they've got some fat to operate on. I mentioned the barometric pressure changes, and Dr. Martin Goldstein was the first one that kind of pointed this out to us years ago. He's a nationally known holistic vet, international actually, and he wrote a book called The Nature of Animal Healing that I would recommend everybody read. It's a really good one. But he had mentioned that in response to barometric pressure changes, our bodies become more positively charged, and that means we start throwing off some calcium. So anybody that has any degree of arthritis can usually tell you 2 or 3 days before a storm shows up, even if it's bright, clear blue sky, they'll get some achy joints because that calcium is kind of being thrown off. So it's super important that horses have access to our free choice program. And again, reminder, every horse needs to be on one of the basic supplements first, either Dynamite Original Formula, Dynamite Plus, or TNT. There's kind of a misconception, I think, because we call the free choice starter pack a starter pack. It's not where you start with the Dynamite products. It's the starter pack for the free choices. So in order of supplements that they need to be on, number one, DynaPro, any horse, every horse, even if they're eating some other brand of food or supplement, they can use the DynaPro. Second would be your choice of either Plus, regular, or TNT, and then put out the free choices. Otherwise, you're getting, creating an imbalance, and they'll eat far more of the free choices than they really need. And we have noticed that horses that are on TNT don't seem to consume as much of the 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 or the Ismine as horses that are not on TNT. So makes TNT look even more economical than it really is. So making sure that they have especially the 2-to-1. Add more DynaPro for sure. Make sure they have access to all the free choices, including the NTM salt. And we'll talk a little bit more about salt in just a bit. There's also a misconception that horses need grain or more grain in the wintertime, which is actually not true. It's digestion of fiber, long fiber in the hay, that actually creates heat in the body. So boot up the hay, and definitely I'm a fan of slow feeders so that they have hay 24/7. There's a thing that happens if you feed just 2 or 3 times a day. It's proven that there's at least 1,000% spike in blood sugar when they take those first few bites of hay, even if they've been without hay for just a couple hours. So we're all familiar with that scenario when you go out in the morning and they're literally attacking you for the hay and taking these huge, big, gomping bites that they're barely chewing. That can precipitate colic because you get undigested or unchewed bits of hay back into the hindgut. So 24/7 hay, you can do it in a net, you can do it in a slow feeder. Just make sure that they have that hay available all the time. And depending on your horse, you might want to have the hay tested. If you have a horse that is a bit tipsy, older, getting into insulin resistance, Cushing's stuff, you want to find a hay that's below 10 to 12% NSC, which is non-structural carbohydrates. So you can feed a little bit lesser quality of hay and have it available in a slow feeder all the time. Then if you want to add just a little bit, maybe a pound or so of alfalfa or a hay that's a little bit higher protein, higher nutrition, you can do that as well. The biggest thing is they should always have hay in front of them, and especially in the wintertime. The other thing that we can do to get them through the winter in good shape is supplement with a fat protein supplement. The Dynamite High Energy Supplement pellets are actually just made to order for this. They are included in the TNT. If you're feeding the TNT, you get a bonus of a full cup of the HES pellets in the TNT. So the TNT is 10% non-structural carbs, so it's very safe for the insulin-resistant, laminitic, Cushing's type horses. Contains 8% fat with a balanced ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. We'll talk about those more in a minute. And it's approximately 25% protein. And the HES pellets are actually our whole non-GMO extruded triple cooked soybeans. We have a supplier in the Midwest. We own the mills in the Midwest that produce this. So it's not soybean meal, which is pretty much crapola. Soybean meal is what's used in most horse feeds, and that's generally had the oil extracted from it using hexane, which is a petroleum distillate, yuck, and the oil and enzymes are all taken out. So what you get is just the pure protein component without the oil and enzymes and things that help to digest it. So the pros and cons of various fats. I know there are people that feed things like black oil sunflower seeds and different things like that. So I want to briefly touch on that. If you're not going to feed Hess, which of course is highly recommended, flax is used in a lot of supplements as a base. There's quite a bit of information out there about flax. It's actually been questioned as a food because it contains a lot of factors that interfere with normal development of humans and animals, mainly due to toxic cyanoglycosides. One is called linamarin, and also has vitamin B6 antagonist factors in it. So basically, flax ends up being a thyroid inhibitor, contains phytic acid, trypsin inhibitors, goitrogens, again, suppressing thyroid. So that's one reason that flax has been really popular to fatten cattle for slaughter. But we're not talking about cattle here. We're talking about healthy athletes. So flax does have a high concentration of the omega-3 fatty acids, but the trade-offs are maybe not so great. Quote from Madeline Ward, noted holistic veterinarian. She says, "I have to say, I felt instinctively that flax was not good in large amounts in the diet. This confirms my suspicions." And she's referring to the quotes above. So we actually took all flax, which is also called linseed, out of Dynamite products well over 25 years ago when we realized that it had these anti-nutritional factors and was a thyroid suppressant. So not my fave. I know a lot of people have jumped on the copra with products like Cool Stance. Copra does have a relatively high protein content, but it's not the same quality found in protein sources like soy. Copra does not contain a balanced complement of essential amino acids. It's really low in lysine, which is the most essential amino acid, and it's essential for growth of young horses especially, and for support of the immune system. So it helps protect against viruses like the EHV1 and rhino and all of those things. The other thing with copra tends to be high in phosphorus and low in calcium. So you do need to make sure that you're feeding, have plenty of access to the 2-to-1. If you feed copra, maybe add even a little bit of alfalfa to the diet. It also has a zinc to copper ratio imbalance that hay can't fix. So some copra can be rich in copper but kind of average in zinc. Zinc to copper ratio between 3-to-1 and 5-to-1 is ideal, but some copra can have a ratio as low as 2-to-1. So that zinc to copper ratio is vital for development of young horses. We can balance it out, but if you do feed copra, you need to do these things. You need to add lysine in particular, as well as making sure the horse has access to 2-to-1 free choice, and add maybe a smidge of Dynahoof, which is high in chelated zinc, to help balance out that zinc to copper balance. So again, copra can be used as a fat source, not my choice. Black oil sunflower seeds, often called BOSS, B-O-S-S, are a popular addition. They're very nutritious, protein, vitamins, minerals, especially high in magnesium. They're high in fat, but the type of fat is mainly omega-6s with very little omega-3. And the thing to remember is the omega-6 fatty acids are inflammatory. They actually produce the inflammatory prostaglandins in the body. So if a horse has any kind of inflammation due to injury, aging, obesity, you definitely want to stay away from the black oil sunflower seeds. They have approximately, in a cup of black oil sunflower seeds, you'd get 10,000 milligrams of the inflammation-producing omega-6 and only 34 milligrams of omega-3s. So if you do choose to feed the BOSS, Then add a few ounces of chia seed, which is super high in omega-3. The other thing with the black oil sunflower seeds, they're sold as wild bird seed, and very often they've been treated with an anti-sprouting chemical because people don't like to see sunflowers growing under their bird feeders. So you want to make sure that these seeds have not been pre-treated with anti-sprouting crap. So it's fairly inexpensive to feed, but you also need to factor in feeding chia to balance that omega-6 to 3. Chia seeds are the highest plant-based source of omega-3 with about a 3-to-1 ratio. Then they have a lot of benefits. They're calming because it's high in magnesium. They really help with digestion, preparation for breeding, support for allergies, skin and coat. They help increase hydration because they uptake water and form a gel in the gut. The clinker is chia does have the same low ratio of calcium to phosphorus as copra does, and is lacking in zinc compared to copper as well. So if you feed chia seeds, you'd want to do the same thing you would if you were feeding copra. Make sure to get a little extra calcium in there and a little extra zinc. Rice bran, super popular as a horse supplement. The problem is all rice is very high in arsenic, naturally occurring arsenic, as well as arsenic from the pesticides that it's treated with. We just drove through Central California on the way back from Sedona and passed all the rice paddies, which are, I guess, kind of disgusting, actually. You see all the ducks and geese swimming out there in the rice paddies and the chemicals, and we passed the big ADM rice plant. There's a lot of stuff that happens with rice, and you can Google arsenic in rice and see a lot of supporting articles for the fact that it does tend to be high in arsenic. Again, it has a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It's about 34% omega-6 and only about 2% omega-3. And I kind of had an epiphany about rice bran earlier this year. It was kind of fun. Two people in a row had emailed me saying, I'm feeding this supplement and my horse is really hyper. And in both cases, it was a rice bran based supplement. The thing with arsenic is in small amounts, it's a stimulant. And it was kind of an old horse trader trick years ago that they would use injectable arsenic on a horse that they were putting through a sale, because you'll get kind of instant bloom and kind of some burst of energy, a little bit of hyper, and people would say, wow, it's a great horse, he's really fit, he's got tons of energy. And then after a while, the crash happens because the arsenic builds up to a more toxic level. So not a fan of rice bran either. So making sure that you understand why I believe that Hess is actually the best fat protein source to supplement, especially during the winter, for broodmares, for growing horses, for high performance horses. Nutritionist Amy Gill says horses need vegetarian sources of protein to supply amino acids, and soy protein provides the closest match to equine amino acid requirements. Jeff Tucker, who's a veterinarian, says lysine is critical for almost every protein in the horse and you, because it helps to make the other proteins available for use. Without lysine, the remaining amino acids and proteins just aren't as abundant to do their jobs. It's the number one limiting essential amino acid and is often not available in large enough quantities in grass and hay. It's the first key to unlocking protein efficiency in supplementation and is essential for horses kept in our care today. So it's super important to get lysine in there. It plays a huge role in the immune system, has antiviral properties, specifically beneficial for safeguarding horses against herpes virus, which is like the EHV1 thing that rears its ugly head. It's been shown to decrease occurrences of anxiety, assist in the formation of collagen and muscle tissue, so that's why fans of the HES pellets call it top line in a bag. We also mentioned that it's the most essential amino acid for growth in young horses. So Whole soy is a great fat source, and it's in the whole food form that's best for horses. Extracted oils are really high in omega-6 pro-inflammatory stuff, and usually extracted by hexane, as we mentioned. So horses don't have a gallbladder. They don't have the ability to emulsify an oil for better digestion. So it actually coats the lacteal ducts in the intestine and blocks some of the fat-soluble vitamins. So anyway, I'm a big fan of adding the HES pellets, and I like to do that in a wet mash. So what I do, I like to use the Standley Timothy pellets or the Timothy alfalfa pellets, just a couple cups a day, and soak them really, really well. Not just so they're kind of mealy, but so that they're kind of like a jello or cow pie consistency. And I know that can be a hassle if you're feeding a bunch of horses, but I'm a huge fan of getting some wet feed into them, especially in the wintertime when the grass is all dried up. So a couple cups of that. My trick was to add water to cover them in the little buckets the night before, just to start the soaking process, because it can take some time. And then in the morning, I would just top it off with warm water, add half an ounce of Dynaspark a day, just to help with the electrolyte balance and to encourage drinking. I know there are some vets that say, oh, just throw a tablespoon of Morton's salt in the grate every day and they'll drink more water. I don't like to do that. I like to do a balanced electrolyte formulation. So adding that to the mash and some Dynapro is a good thing. You can also put the supplement in there if you want. And getting horses to drink water in the wintertime, of course, is a huge consideration. I know there are a lot of horses that don't like tank heaters. They don't like automatic waterers. I've had water heaters that put so much metal taste into the water that it just stinks, and horses are kind of reluctant to drink it. So a lot of us have spent many years lugging warm water from the house if we don't have hot water in the tack room. So keeping the water at a consistent drinking temperature, getting the ice chunks out, etc. And if you do have a horse that's reluctant to drink in the wintertime, the first thing to suspect is ulcers, especially cold water hitting stomach and gut ulcers, you can imagine, is not a comfy thing. The other thing is potential bad teeth. Anybody who's ever had a root exposed in a tooth or had a tooth that reacts when you eat ice cream or drink ice water knows how unpleasant that can be. So those are two things to check if you have one that's reluctant to drink. Check for ulcers, maybe do our clay protocol, which is never a bad thing. Check the teeth for sure. And let's see, consider feeding TNT for the winter, because you do get the Hess and you get the easy balance to help with the blood sugar. Pasture tends to be high in non-structural carbs this time of year. The grass looks dead and brown, but it's deadly. Actually has a much higher sugar content than actively growing grass. So a lot of horses get into trouble with laminitis, fall laminitis, winter founder, Cushing's, etc. Another thing I like to do is potentially add some oxymega to make up for the vitamin E and omegas that they would normally be getting in green grass. So adding even an ounce of the oxymega in the wintertime to the TNT or your other supplement is a really good idea. So we get into the exercise shelter thing, the blanket controversy, pros and cons, blah, blah, blah. My observation is people just need to use common sense. If your horse is older, on the thin side, doesn't grow much of a winter coat, if you trace clip so that the horse is being worked and not sweating so much in the wintertime, then you obviously need to blanket. One of my pet peeves is to see people that throw a nylon sheet on them when it gets cold. All you're doing is packing down the loft of the hair that's puffed up to make the insulation. It's kind of like having a nylon windbreaker on in a snowstorm. You're going to actually be colder than if you'd had something else on. So blanketing is a huge commitment. You need to get them off if the temperature goes up. have heavier blankets for the colder weather. And a lot of times if you're in a boarding situation, they're not willing to do that. Or if you work away from home, it can be 0 degrees when you leave for work, and it can be 45 by the time you get home, and your horse is sweating under the heavy blanket. So working that out is kind of a big deal. And asking the horse, they will tell you if they want a blanket or not, and they just see you bring the blanket out. If they dive in head first and they're happy to see you, that's great. If they run the other way, that's a pretty clear message. I had a neighbor who insisted on keeping her horses blanketed all winter with heavy Big D insulated blankets. And one horse liked it, the other horse didn't. She had a mare named Elvira who lived up to her name. And occasionally I'd feed for her if she was working late or something. And this mare had to be tied up to the wall to have her blanket put on, and especially her hood put on. And she would bite, she would kick, she would try to mash you into the wall, anything to keep that hood from going on. So again, a case of the owner not observing the obvious. The horse is saying as graphically as possible, I do not want that thing on me. So as long as they have a place to stay out of the wind and to get dry, they're generally fine to live outside, unless, of course, you have a show barn and you're working and training all winter. It's pretty typical for horses to be averse to going into their shelters or standing right outside the shelter in a raging snowstorm with their butts turned to the wind. So as long as they have a wall they can get behind to break the wind, as long as they have some big trees, potential roofs so they can stay dry, wet and windy is their biggest enemy. So have the shelter available and let the horse decide. I've had horses who were such wimps at the first raindrop they'd run for their stalls, had others that have icicles hanging off their bellies and they're just happy as clams. So one other thing that can rear its ugly head in the winter also is rain rot. If they're wet for a long time and there's dirt collecting on their backs, and obviously we're talking about a pasture situation, boosting the immune system helps. There is some SOD in the oxymega, as well as some chia, which helps with the anti-inflammatory omega-3s. If you do get rain rot, my favorite recipe is 10 parts olive oil to 1 part tea tree oil. Put it in a spray bottle and spray it on. It'll loosen up any scabby junk that's there, and it forms kind of an oil barrier, so it protects the skin from getting wet and having more scrunch grow. So that's basically my list of stuff. So I guess we can open it for questions or comments. Anything you'd like to add, Callie?
Oh gosh, I thank you, Judy. I've been writing as fast as I humanly can. This was you jammed a lot into this. Thank you, thank you. If I'm sure that everybody else is scratching as quickly as they can. I can open it up for questions if we'd like to try that. There are quite a few people on the call, so do you want to give it a go and we'll just see what we come up with?
Sure.
Okay, let me just unmute everybody. Okay, everybody should be unmuted. If there's somebody who has a question that would like to speak up at this time and ask Judy, you're welcome to. Maybe they're too shy.
Cricket.
Well, we don't usually open it up. It may just be that everybody's wasn't thinking they had an opportunity to do that. So I guess what I'll say is if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to email them to Callie at dynamitemarketing.com, and I will see that they get to Judy and that we get your questions answered. Thank you, Judy. Again, you put a lot of time and effort into gathering all this information, and you're such a gift to this company. Thank you. If you guys enjoyed this call, then please note that Judy will be one of the speakers at our spring conference next year in Seattle, March 16th through the 18th. We're still in the pre-registration phase, so you can get in at a discount if you do it before January 16th, I think it is. So please feel free to come and join us in March, and you can hear Judy speak again. Also wanted to note that we will be having another call this year on the 13th of December. It'll be the last call of the year. It'll be a 2 and it's going to be preparing yourself for a new start in 2018 using the 180 protocol. So if you're interested in that, then please feel free to join us in 2 weeks at the same time. And unless there are other questions, then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. No other people speaking up, I guess. Okay, well, Judy, again, thank you so much. You are such a fantastic gift to this company, and all this information today was fantastic, and I'm sure that you helped a lot of people.
Well, thanks. Enjoy your day, guys. Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.